And so I started writing, and that was it. Like, I had no plan B. There was no plan B at all. It's like, I'm going to write, I'm going to pay the bills this way. And so I think stories have even more power than alcohol, a lot more power than alcohol. But when it comes to content, what I want is not to protect my kids from things with which they disagree. I want to equip them to disagree. At one point, Random House made me write a statement of faith to have on file whenever they had people trying to cancel me. They would send out my statement of faith. This is what he actually thinks. I was never a secret as far as like, I'm a Christian, I'm a believer, and I'm the kind of Christian that means it.
Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the podcast. I just concluded interviewing N.D. Wilson, and let me tell you, we covered a lot of things, and I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation, but I wanted to give you kind of more of like a formal bio as to who N.D. Wilson is, because we don't cover everything that he's done. He's actually done a lot. He has authored numerous middle grade fiction books. I think that's what you call them. He talks about it. I didn't know what middle grade was before this interview, so I think I just said that properly. He's also written some nonfiction. That's actually how I first was introduced to N.D. Wilson. He wrote a book called Death by Living, and it was given to me. I loved it, and then I gave it to Katie the first time we were dating, and I think it started to enjoy it, but then I broke up with her. And so, and that was the last book I gave her before we broke up. And I think it was the last book I read before we broke up the first time. And so she threw that book away and refused to read anything by N.D. Wilson until recently. But we've worked through that because, obviously I came back to my senses, chased her down, and we are living happily ever after as of now. But enough about us. Back to N.D. Wilson. He has authored numerous books, including Leepike Ridge, a children's adventure story, the 100 Cupboards series. He's written and been the executive producer of a Netflix children's series called Hello Ninja. There's 4 seasons of it. It's ranked extremely high on Netflix every time for each one of its seasons. He also has a great podcast called Stories Are Soul Food, and actually it's probably been my favorite podcast for the last year now, maybe the last year and a half. So I highly recommend Stories Are Soul Food. I will link everything that I just mentioned below so that you can find out more about N.D. Wilson, about his books, about his podcast, about his Netflix children's show. Enjoy the episode.
The Now That We're a Family podcast.
All right, N.D. Wilson. I've already given a brief introduction as to who you are to our listeners, but I'd love to hear, from your own mouth, what you tell people you do. Who are you? When you bump into somebody that maybe hasn't seen you for 10 or 15 years, they're like, what are you doing with your life? What's the answer these days?
I'm coaching basketball. Let's see. That's probably the most important thing.
Okay.
I'm a writer. So I write for kids. I write for families. That's my emphasis. Now I'm involved in a bunch of TV writing, but mostly like middle grade novels is really where my heart is and where my brand is. And I think that's where I will be probably till I die. So I think when I've written a TV show or I'm on a TV show, it's a lot of fun, but I think I'll come back to like sitting on my front porch and working on middle grade novels in the end. I think that's going to be the emphasis.
What is a middle grade novel?
A middle grade novel is I had described to me once by a national book award winner as all of the intelligence, none of the hormones.
I like it. So
you think about a middle grade novel is basically like that last summer of childhood is like your 12, your early teens, You can have 12-year-olds there. It can go all the way down to 8, 8 to 12. A lot of people think of it as a rating, like PG versus PG-13, that kind of range. I think of it as like a soft PG-13.
Okay.
But it's not really a rating. It's a target demographic. So there's a big difference between how consumers think about those classifications and how readers think about those classifications. Readers think of them as ratings. The publishers, not consumers, how publishers think of them. Publishers think of them as target demos. Readers think of them as ratings. So middle grade is more PG. But the publishers are targeting certain ages. They're really looking for that 8 to 12-year-old. Now, most of my novels, probably most of my readers are still adults. But the thing about middle grade is that you're not entering into YA. When you're in YA, you're in that middle teen space. And YA is driven by love triangles and crushes and relationships, and it's all kind of obsessive about that. So middle grade to me is where all the good stuff is. It's where the great stories are. The things I really love to read, the stories I love to tell. And so the description of all of the intelligence, none of the hormones is one that I've hung on to, because you don't have the love triangles, but you also believably for the reader can have a certain degree of athleticism and adventure. And these kids, they can believably do things. They're not incompetent. They're not helpless. So I love targeting it also. And the reason why I did when I was first getting started writing, I think I got my book deal in first one in like 2005. And I had actually had offers to pursue an adult novel because I'd written some short stories, and I had a publisher reaching out, and I had the opportunity to write middle grade. And so I had to choose whether I was going to go literary commercial adult fiction or whether I was going to go middle grade fiction. Now, the ceiling, in terms of, I don't know what you would say, status, identity, even some money over on the adult fiction side can be much higher. But I wanted to be able to write stories that had concrete endings that resolved, that really like the good guys won. It's like, and if you write that for adults, everybody kind of poo-poos it. That's sort of like, nah, the good guys never win. Like it never resolves in a satisfying way. You're going to be stuck in the ghetto of genre fiction, or you're never going to be taken seriously. But I can write for 12-year-olds, and I can really bring a beautiful catharsis, a beautiful resolution. And everybody is all excited about it. They're like, yes, because it's for the kids. Like the adults are reading it. They're all the same people are reading it, but it's for kids. And so we can have this happy ending. And so if you really think about it, middle grade fiction is the sweet spot is like 5th and 6th graders. That's right there. And then as soon as you move up and into middle school a little bit, but as soon as you get up and up into junior high and you start knocking on the door of high school, then it's all who's cool, who's popular, who's whom, and all that stuff.
Nice. Does that help too with being able to keep the content at a place where it's realistic without being provocative? Because that's a big difference when I read, what we'll call, whatever the air quotes are, Christian adult novels. I'm thinking that's not how people talk. There's this element of like, they use more profanity. There's more violence. There's more. That's how at least Hollywood's portrayed it. But when you're reading, and maybe this isn't the right reference, when you're reading the Hardy Boys or the Boxcar Children or Nancy Drew, you're like, yeah, that's how kids should talk. I'm able to get into this story. Is there some accuracy with that?
Yeah. So middle grade is, I love it for the fact that I can have concrete resolution, the fact that I can avoid content that I don't want to, get into. And it's more content friendly. And then also on top of that, it's a place where there's this final magic. It does like park at the end of childhood. And so these stories are really, they mark the memories of kids, and they mark who they want to be themselves in life, like who it brands them as they move forward. And so middle grade is really, on a pragmatic level, is really useful because nobody expects me to go really dark. Mm-hmm. Like in terms of like a, sexual, obscene ways. Nobody wants that. And it's not really like, it doesn't fit. It doesn't fit with these stories. Naturally, it doesn't fit, which is why I love it. But it also this final magic of like, if you think about the last summer of your childhood, that's kind of where a middle grade novel could hang out and they do something cool. So there's ways, like if you think about a show like Stranger Things is a classic middle grade structure and middle grade story. It's just they ramp up for the adult audience, they ramp up the intensity and like the horror and all that kind of stuff, and they move it out of that into that. They start thinking YA. So the way Hollywood thinks about it is completely different than the way publishing thinks about it. It's like they're entirely different. But yeah, you're exactly right. Middle grade enables you to avoid certain kinds of content naturally and realistically. And it also enables you to bring the good guys win, good triumphs over evil. And it's this great moment of branding the imaginations as people become young adults and move forward with really great stories. So the way kids, if somebody was like if they loved Redwall, if they loved Narnia, even if they love, The Hobbit, it's like if they love those things, those stories that mark your imagination when you're 11, 12, 13, like those stories stay with you in a really great and permanent way. And that's a big part of why I target that demographic.
Yeah, just the implications last for life, like you said. Yeah, I love that. Love that. So can you kind of take us back to, maybe briefly your childhood? Were you raised in a Christian home? When did writing kind of hit the radar for you, so to speak? And then kind of walk us through that becoming a career.
So it's, my dad's a pastor. My grandfather was a pastor. I'm a third generation believer, never raised as a believer, never had a period of doubt, never went and sowed my oats, never had my Rumspringa. My mom was an English teacher. My dad wrote, he was constantly writing. My mom wrote, but at the time, not so much not fiction. My mother's never written fiction. My dad's written some fiction, but most of that came later. He was writing nonfiction, theology, stuff like that. And then sixth grade, I loved Narnia. I loved Lord of the Rings. I loved that kind of storytelling a lot. And that was kind of when I settled in of like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. Like in sixth grade, I announced that I was going to tell stories. I was going to write, I was going to be a writer. Wasn't a great student prior to that. So, that got some amusement from my sisters that was my, this is what I'm going to do. I was the kind of kid who could really, really complain about a 3-page paper, let alone, write a novel.
Yeah.
So that was amusing to them. And then through high school, I never tried. I never sat down to try to write long form fiction. And I think it's by God's grace that I didn't. It's like I didn't try to tackle the big things. I love to write. I was just writing scenes and sketches and really short pieces. Then on into college was the same thing. I was writing 800-word sketches, just trying to it's like I wanted to make movies, but I was just working with photography. It's like that kind of a thing. All I was doing was just working with photography, which has immediate application when you eventually get there. So I was reading a ton and, just grabbing stills, just grabbing frames. And then into grad school, same thing. Studied at St. John's in Annapolis, Maryland. Loved the great books. My undergrad was just liberal arts. I got a liberal arts degree. Really was a classics degree, ancient languages and classic books. And then I moved on and kind of did the same thing in my grad degree. And it never crossed my mind that I was not going to be a writer. I had, I don't know, I could say ignorance was my protection. I had no idea how hard it would be. I had no idea how difficult it is to really make it go. And at the time, I just got out of grad school and thought, okay, now it's time to start writing. It's it. And so I'd done all my vitamins, my push-ups and my little micro training, but it's like, now I'm going to write long form stuff.
Wow.
Got married in grad school. So I got married young. I was 22, married a surfer from Santa Cruz, as one does when you're from Idaho.
Yeah.
And we moved back to Idaho, and I was looking for work, and I'd always kind of had this assumption that I would just imitate C.S. Lewis and I'll be a teacher. I'll teach and I'll use those periods of breaks and so on to write. I'll use the rhythm of the school year to fill in my writing. I couldn't get full-time teaching work. I couldn't get, any kind of full-time work. I'm newly married. We've got a baby on the way now. It's like 1 year later. And I'm just like, man, I just got to do this. Like I was just putting together different part-time jobs. I'd worked construction in college and high school. So I had some skills to fall back on if I needed to, but it was just like an all in. And so I started writing, and that was it. Like I had no plan B. There was no plan B at all. It's like, I'm going to write. I'm going to pay the bills this way. It was burning the candle at both ends. I was just going. And when I can't even, looking back, I think it's hilarious what a terrible plan that was. But it worked. And so I graduated 2000 in the year 2001 from grad school, putting together part-time work. And by 2005, I had a 4-book deal with Random House.
Wow.
So it was this grind of like a part-time editorial and doing short writing and doing some teaching and just like chasing. And so I had a situation where I wrote a rough draft, and I'd successfully landed an agent, which was step one. And he asked me what I was working on, and I sent him this massive bloated rough draft for what was 100 cupboards. And it was one big massive story, single volume, massive story. And I hadn't read it yet. I just finished the rough draft and was like, here, this is what I've got right now, and I'm about to go back through it. He sent it out to every major publishing house, and I hadn't read it yet. It was a rough draft. I was humiliated. I mean, it was really unfortunate. And so that was maybe 2003, late 2003, early 2004, somewhere in there. And then I start getting back these really long, nice rejection letters. And like, people are really engaging with it. They really liked it. They really liked the writing, the creativity, but it's like, man, but structure's a mess. It's, all sorts of things. So it was encouraging. I'd fired that agent. I talked a buddy into becoming an agent. He had a book called How to Be a Literary Agent. So we were ready.
Nice.
And I wrote Leepike Ridge. And I wrote Leepike Ridge as this standalone, single, tight, small, middle grade adventure novel to send out to everybody who'd seen 100 Cupboards to prove to them that I could write a disciplined, tight thing. They'd seen this huge, bloated, rough draft. I wanted to, show them this. But then that turned into something hilarious too, because I told my friend, this new agent, here's the first 3 chapters. Just send out the first 3 chapters. It'll take everybody forever to read it, so I can keep working. Eventually they'll ask for the full manuscript, and then, we'll go from there. The problem was everybody read it right away, and everybody requested the full manuscript right away. And so he called me and said, hey, I'm going to be back east, and I told him I'd drop off the full manuscript, and that's like in 2 weeks. So you got to finish, like, go. So it turned into this frantic push anyway. And he drove into New York City from Philly, where he was, and like double parked outside of a Kinko's basically, and went in and like printed out these things, and
nice.
Went in, knocked them on the desk, and then we started juggling offers. Like, offers started coming in. And Random House had been one of the houses that had read my first giant bloated cupboards rough draft. And so they came back with Leepike Ridge. They offered me a 4-book deal, like Cupboards as a trilogy and Leepike Ridge as a standalone. And so I was with them through, 10 years.
Wow.
10 years. I didn't even then moved to HarperCollins, and that's where I still have some stuff now. But that's kind of the story of it. I mean, it was bizarre to have a multi-house situation. I didn't realize the first offer that ever came in was from Bloomsbury, the UK publisher of Harry Potter. And it was so low. I think they offered, was like 15 grand or something like that. And that $15,000 offer came in on Leepike Ridge. And I was like, this was my plan. Like, this is how I was like, this was how I was going to like feed my family.
Yeah.
This is absurd. And then luckily, again, God's grace, more houses were really interested. A bunch of houses came in and they were bidding for stuff. So I was able to actually land a significant 4-book deal that meant this is what I do now. This was like, and that my editor who bought it from me told me when he bought it from me, he's like, just don't quit your day job. He's like, making a living as a full-time writer is incredibly difficult. Do not quit your day job.
Men, the Growth Initiative is now open for enrollment. The Growth Initiative is a 6-week live coaching program for men that are looking to grow in areas of parenthood, in areas of provision, in areas of health, in areas of financial freedom and well-being, really in areas of life that matter most to you. When I look at my life and I think of my faith, my marriage, my parenting, my physical health, my financial growth and ability to provide for my family, I know that in order to see growth in those areas, I've got to have a systematic approach to it. So when I look at my ideals and my dreams, those are only good to me if I'm able to break down an actionable plan that I can then execute. And that's what the Growth Initiative is all about. Customizing your actionable plan to see growth in the areas of life that matter most to you. So if you're a Christian man and you're a husband and you're a father and you want to grow in those areas of life that I already referred to, hop on over. I'll link it below and you'll be able to find a timeline that works for you. Like I said, this is a live coaching program, 6 weeks long with live calls each week, along with tools and resources to help you up your game in those areas that matter most to you. And you can enroll in whatever session works for you time-wise. Mentioned you graduated in, was it 2001? And then you didn't get this deal that you're talking about until 2005. And, when we're talking in retrospect, it's easy just to throw that out like that's nothing. You'd be like, oh yeah. But in that, I'm sure that felt like a long time. If you're a newlywed, you said you had a child in that time frame. So at any point in there, were you like, you know what, it's time to face, reality and go do something else? Was there ever this temptation to compromise on that dream?
There wasn't. I mean, the dream, the plan I compromised on was teaching. I couldn't get that full-time teaching work. I got part-time teaching work. I supplemented, I was able to go assist in this class and, handle this class and put together enough that we didn't starve. But yeah, no, it was rugged. I mean, it was rugged. It was hilarious because we got to a place where our car blew up and we had no car. And at that point we had 3 kids because it was so quick. We had our son, 4 days after our first anniversary. And then his little sister showed up pretty quickly thereafter. And then I'm sitting here holding a very pink newborn, still technically a newborn, 3 months old. I'm on a phone call with a buddy bouncing this little pink girl. And my wife comes over and holds up a positive pregnancy test. And I turned the phone up and just said, why would you save that? That's disgusting. And I'm holding a new baby, and she said, no, this is new. And it was just like, oh my goodness. This is, and I just stopped. I lost track of the phone call. I was just standing there in shock, trying to do math. So we had little girls 12 months apart, almost a day. We went into the hospital with our second daughter on our first daughter's first birthday. Nice. So we had that Irish twin situation going, and they had their little toddler older brother, and that was all happening at the same time. Yes. Yeah, it was wild as I was picking up editorial work and teaching, and my wife was absolutely in and committed. It's and there's no question that needing to provide and needing to break through on something was a massive motivator. I was not staying up really late at night writing out of any kind of pursuit of my own ego, or I need to find any path to fame. I don't care. No, that was never there. It was just, I have got to sell something. I mean, and I love doing this. I really love doing this, but there's a clock on the wall. I have to go. So when that did happen, by the time the check came through and, the ability to like go buy a car, like we were driving super beat up. Like they would always break down. We were always trading, like the last car was going away.
Yeah.
So yeah, the 4 years was really something.
Yeah.
But then even then we got to the deal and it was like a big breath of oxygen. And then you realize what rookies you are. Cause it didn't cross my mind, like little simple things like a 4-book deal. Man, that number looks really big. That's a big number. At least especially to me right then. But then you think like, this is for 4 years of work. Like it's 4 years. Oh, but surprise, it's going to get taxed in 1 year.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get taxed like it's 1 year's income.
Yes.
But now, look, you now have what we came to discover, what we came to call time debt, where like now I owe people a book, it's like, yes. and I'm working off of money. And then the later money that comes in when you turn in stuff is always smaller.
Yes.
There's those later checks. So yeah, we even then it was like, oh, we're breathing. I have a job. It was like, I have a job now. But even that, we had a ton to learn.
Sure.
We had a ton to learn. And it turns out there's not a lot of tax accountants who know how to handle publishing real well. So we had to find those guys. And the rodeo didn't stop. The rodeo has never stopped because being self-employed, never knowing how much money you're going to make in a year, never knowing, COVID can happen. The bottom can just fall out of royalties. Like you can never plan on anything.
Yes.
At all. So, and now I'm deep in it. I'm all the way deep in it. But my wife's risk tolerance was phenomenal. I mean, she was like, this is what we're doing. We're chasing this. This is always the plan. This is always what you said. This is what we're trying to do. But it didn't ever calm down. It was never like, oh, it's life on easy street now. There's just a ton of money.
Yes.
It's like I'm now employed is basically
yes.
what it turned into.
Yeah. Yeah. From a marriage perspective, when you look back in hindsight, or maybe it's like if you were to talk to somebody that's in that position now and, maybe your kids you've got young adult children now, it sounds like they were born in that time frame. It's like, that can be a tricky thing because it's like and of course you've got to be united as a marriage and you've got to be on the same page. But then you also, as maybe somebody older advising somebody in that position, that balance of, hey man, this whole rider thing, maybe. And so do you ever find yourself, looking at somebody in a similar stage and being like, what would I tell them? What would I tell myself? Because it sounds like you're grateful with the decisions you've made and where you're at now. And I'm sure lots of people are grateful that you stuck with it. But then when you picture your kids being there, you're thinking, maybe this other job actually isn't that bad. Do you ever find that conflict now?
I've got a buddy who's a novelist and a writer, really successful one. He's got an extremely talented daughter who always studied lit and writing. And then as soon as she was coming out of school, it was like, I'm taking an office job. I'm taking I want that. I want to be able to budget. I don't want to be able to know and I get that. It's kind of there's times when kids just don't want to they don't want to go through that nature, that experience. It's really attractive to not be on a roller coaster. I can understand that. But the thing is, when I've talked to guys, well, let's put it this way. Here's one of my stories. I'll just claim. Are you familiar with the Green Ember books?
Yes.
Yeah. So Sam was a friend and he had these stories he was telling his kids and, he had his day job and he was doing this. And I had a session with him. I take full credit for this. And it's like, Sam, just do it. Like you have something here that people are going to love, that they're going to really attach to. You can make this work. This will work. If you clear out the rest of your schedule and put all that time into this, it's going to go. Just pull the pin and go. And he was really, I don't think I'm slandering him when I say that Sam is risk averse. He's a good buddy. He was a lot more reasonable and cautious than I was, and a lot more informed. He's just a really humble guy, but he'd seen what it takes. Like he'd seen what it takes to really do it. And so with him, I was really heavily encouraging him, you need to make the switch. Like, you need to just be a writer. You can't can't be halfway on this, but the potential's here for you to actually support your family doing this. I mean, this is, and so that's an example of one, session with a guy that I was really saying, go be this writer, like go do that thing. And I'm like, this is why I take full credit for all that, but it's, and he's done an amazing job. Like, Sam's done an amazing job, as has his brother, as their whole team. Like, they've just done a phenomenal job, beyond what I was even expecting. It's like they didn't need to have done that well in order for this to make sense. But there's other times when I'm talking to younger artists, not just writers, but somebody who's in fine arts, or somebody who's really good at graphics. They love graphic, they want to make that work. Anytime somebody's a creative and is going to go down the life of self-employed, like, I'm going to go be self-employed creative, whether it's film, graphics, fiction, fine arts, anything like that, illustration. If they're getting married, it has to be a team. It has to be both of them committed to it. And it's really going to come down to, this is the weirdest thing, is can his wife, if it's, if you're talking about a guy who's pursuing this and wants to provide for his family this way, can his wife keep from becoming competitive with his work?
Mm-hmm.
Like, can it be our work? This is our work. We're doing this together. We're pursuing this together. Or when he's really like got his nose to the grindstone and is really trying to crush something for the family, is there going to be tension? Is there going to be this, why aren't you paying? Like, you should focus on me and we should work on a relationship and we're going to do all this stuff, as opposed to come alongside me and the two of us are going this direction. Yeah. So with my wife, she was listening to every draft. She was listening to every chapter read aloud. She was listening to me edit. So she has a really great editorial ear now too, because I would be reading her my chapter and then I would be editing as I went. So I'd stop, I'd read a line and stop, rewrite it, and then read that line. So she saw the iteration the whole way, and she was 100% on board. If you're aligned like that and you're down for the whitewater, you're down for the risk, you're fine being poor for a while. Like, you're fine being poor forever if this is what you're called to do. It's like if this is your calling and she understands, this is your calling and I'm here for it, mm-hmm. then you're great. You're going to have a happy life. It's like, it doesn't matter if you never have that nice car, you never have those giant vacations, like whatever. Doesn't matter. You're going to have a happy life. You have a calling that you're pursuing. And if you're pursuing it to honor God and your wife is doing that with you, like, that alignment will give you joy and the labor together and everything else. The outcome can be whatever it is in that case. If it's a flip and you're talking about an artist wife, an artist mom, like, she's really driven to write, it's a little bit tougher in some ways. And it's also a little bit easier because she's in a place where there can be some natural incubation. There's some natural protection from the risk. So, if when kids are little, if it's nap time when she's writing, it's like, or if she's just saying, what, when the kids have gotten a little older and I have my mental energy back, like, this is what I'm doing. Yeah. And he's not called to that. If he's not called to the creative life, maybe he's working at a bank or he's swinging a hammer or whatever it is, that can still work. It can still supplement, because art and stories and all those things, like, they're so essential for kids. They're so essential for families. It's such a key part of making families what they are. And so if you have a mom who's creating for her children, her friends' children, her nieces and her nephews, and on down, that's great. It's like having a great cook in the house. It's like just cooking soul food for everybody. Mm-hmm. But if it's the guy and this is how they're providing, how they're going to pay the bills, you have to have alignment. The wife has to be in. Like, she has to be on board. Otherwise, it's just going to be miserable. And if she is on board and they have alignment of this is their mission together, they're doing this together, then I think there's going to be a lot of victory there and a lot of joy there.
Yeah, something that I feel like I've seen happen a lot in regards to maybe it's a writing project that the wife has a passion for, or an entrepreneurial endeavor, or some creative project that is exactly what you just described. It's during nap time or it's during the margins in her day. And the husband's just, he's got more of a traditional career, keeping the bills paid. And then that side hustle or that passion project turns into a thing. It turns into a big thing over time. And then there's this kind of awkward existence in the home of, okay, who's leading this charge right now? The husband was in this role of provider and protector, and he was clearly walking in that, God-given role that we've been given. And then all of a sudden, because of the success of the wife's passion project, which you want to celebrate, and you're like, this is awesome. Yeah. There can be this convoluting and confusion of who's making the decisions, financially for the home, or who's making the decisions in the overall direction of the home. And have you seen that take place? And how would you advise people in that position?
Yeah. So it's actually kind of funny. This is kind of exactly what my sister has, so it's my little sister. She's a writer too, but she started out, I made her write her first book, called Loving the Little Years, was, about mothering. Subtitle is Motherhood in the Trenches, about mothering in those toddler years, those crazy years. It's great little book. Her husband's very successful, executive VP, big company. And she's really built a ministry, a really successful publishing, and I'd say she would hate it if I said this, but I'll say it anyway, like a social media ministry. She's reached a lot of women by launching something that she called the Bible Reading Challenge, where she's like getting tens of thousands of women to go through scripture every year. She's got a pretty significant Instagram profile and a significant publishing footprint. She's doing webinars for moms. It's like she's got a lot going. And if she wanted to, she could just say, yeah, let's go have a career there. But she doesn't want to. She knows that career number one for her, like her absolute calling, is her own little mob of children. And in as much as she can show hospitality from that home to the world, she will. But it's hospitality for her. It is not, she's not trying to build this extra career. It's like, no, this is a thing that's an outworking of who we are. It's incubated by my husband. Like he's built this whole ecosystem in which she's functioned, and it's their hospitality. So it's very much the case that when a family's showing hospitality, that burden lands on the wife. I mean, it just does. It's like a family showing hospitality, all the work is happening for mom. It's happening for her, but it's frequently being subsidized, paid for, facilitated in the house. Like the house that he's paid for. The groceries been bought with by him. Not always, but that's often the case, and that's kind of, I think, the best way to view it. Like it needs to be an outworking of who you are together. Like, this is our family, and the structure of that family doesn't change. And this is our hospitality to the world. So when my older sister is, she's designing fabrics and wallpapers, and she's selling all this kind of stuff. Like she's doing all those kinds of things. It's an outworking of their family and what she put on the walls of their dining room, and what she's like her home centricity. Like it's an outworking of that. And when my little sister is doing these webinars and publishing and stuff, it's the same kind of thing. There's an ambassadorial relationship there. It is this outward focus, but it is an outward exporting of what has been made at home, what was generated by this family and by this relationship. So when you get into a position where the nap time entrepreneurial thing, that mom came up with, she hit some genius idea, and dad's like, man, this is really something. It's like, the question is it them? Is it the same? Is it the same thing? And are they going to then say, yeah, this is us now? And he's like, you know what? I'm quitting my job wherever, and we're going all in on this. That can be slippery and dangerous, but it can also be great. Mm-hmm. It can be great if properly understood and properly aligned. And if the team unity and the understanding of how this came to be, like there's no reason to be scared of it. The problem, the danger and the problem comes when you have a mom who's going to abandon motherhood to go be, I'm an entrepreneur and then I'm a mom. It's like, no, it needs to be like I'm a mom and then I'm that.
Yes.
Like this secondary to that core thing. And that's true for dads too, just differently.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a dad before I'm a writer. I gotta be ready if fatherhood demands, if there is some demand of fatherhood up against some writing deadline, I know which one has to win.
Yes.
It's not complicated.
Yes.
The wish break, the right way every single time, whether it's for the husband or for the wife.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I like what you said, it being an outpouring of something that's taking place in the home, or maybe it's like the customer or the audience gets what's downstream. Like the home gets the best. The kids get the first, that first fruit, so to speak. They get the best. And then, saying leftovers almost sounds like a cheaper version of it, but it's really kind of downstream where it's an outpouring of, hey, this was cultivated here. This was happening in this incubated environment, and now there's an overflow that you're able to provide to a larger demographic.
I think we all know or have seen those situations where the kids got the short end of the stick, and this is it's tragic that this happens a lot in missionary families. It's tragic that this happens in those places where the focus was too outward for the family, and the kids are lost. So, tend your flock at home, and then that outpouring.
Yes.
For sure.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, if we could talk a little bit, just kind of maybe a way to think, because we've got a lot of parents that, they're homeschooling their kiddos. They're bringing literature into their home, whether that's because they're taking like a classical education approach or a Charlotte Mason approach. But it's kind of like they want to have a rich literature kind of foundation in their home. And then with that, and that's where my wife is taking our kiddos in our home, and I like it, but I also get a little confused sometimes because you go to the classics and I'm like, okay, content is all over the place in some of these things. And I feel like so many of these books get like grandfathered in to have our kids read them. And I'm like, wow, I'm uncomfortable as a full-grown adult reading this content. I certainly don't want my kids reading it. And this could kind of also carry over into fantasy or into magic, or even not classical stuff, but more contemporary stuff with Harry Potter. How should parents approach things like that, when it comes to bringing it into their home? Could you speak to that for a bit?
Yeah. So there's two things. I think that you need to know the frame of your children. Like, you need to know their frame. There's a lot of people who just make their kids hate the classics by introducing them too early or with poor instruction or things like that. But at the same time, what you want and what I want in my kids is I want culture shapers. I want people who can build a world. They can step into the ruins of the West, kind of what we have now, like the smoking ruins, and actually build. Like Nehemiah, they can actually start rebuilding things. So education is not for pleasure, but you should enjoy the process. So there's a ton of books that have been stuck in front of my kids, or they've had to work through, that are not fun. It's not fun for them. It wouldn't be fun for me. And if you're talking about a high school kid reading Moby Dick and really engaging Moby Dick, it's like, why am I reading all these things? It really has to do with engaging with greatness, engaging with like the architecture of the Western world. And so even when you're reading stuff, if you're reading Ovid, you're reading some of the stuff, back there, you're reading the Iliad, you're reading the Odyssey, and you're saying, this is not appropriate behavior, Odysseus. This is inappropriate. Like, well, that's one of the things you have to talk about. But at the same time, you're engaging with it there educationally. You're engaging with it not just to be entertained. You're not there to be entertained. You're there to really inherit everything that came down from your great grandfathers through the entire Western world. So God introduced the gospel where it's like we have the massive Greek world that then the Latin world is an extension of. It's like, and Christ comes, the gospel comes, and in the context, even the ancients, like I love having my kids read the classics and even kind of some of the grittier, like ancient BC stuff, because I want them to see the world that Christ came into. And you need to see the before to appreciate the after. You need to understand like the nature of storytelling, the nature of what they thought holiness was, what they thought a God was, where God got his authority, everything else. And then in the context of the Christian narrative and why did the gospel come? And you can't even, I don't think, understand the actual story of the gospel without seeing the story of the Greeks and ancient mythology. And you look at the Persians, the Greeks, and you look at the sons of God, the sons of gods and titans. The reason why they were all frantically trying to be related to demons, be related to these fallen angels, is they knew this was the way. The way was to be like related to a God by blood, which is what we are. We are related to a God by blood. It's like that's the way it is. They all knew that. And they chased it in all this futility and confusion. It's like, and you see that, but you see the story of the Titans. You see that if you only go look at the Bible stories and you look at like the darkness, the incredible darkness that Christ came into, like you understand it a lot better. You understand all of it. If you try to study the classics as separated from the gospel, as separated from God's truth, there's no point. Like there's 0 point in doing that. There's a great deal of point in reading what the really like say the zenith of civilization, like the zenith of pagan civilization, of godless, meaning like the triune God of the Bible civilization. This is as high as they got. This is as high as fallen pagan man got. And this is the darkness that it created. And this is where the light entered. And this is how that light enters and why and how it changes everything. So we were really quick to censor stories for content. But I would say that my kids have never read ever anything gnarlier than the Old Testament.
Wow.
So in any of the classics, in any of the mythology they've covered, nothing that they've ever covered touches what's in God's word that is useful for teaching. It's like as 2 Timothy tells us, like all of it's God breathed, and this is, here it is. So when they read those things, when they're reading the Odyssey, when they're reading the Iliad, it needs to be in context. It needs to be in the context of the truth, like the actual truth. Look what ancient man was doing. Look what they're honoring. What's the heroic code? What are they seeking? What are they honoring? What are they blessing? What are they cursing? Like all the confusion, but also those little glimmers when you see common grace come through and they understand the beauty of something or something like that. So I love classical education. I love it fully integrated, completely fully integrated. I don't want ever classical education minus Christian classical education. Like that Christian classical education, if you just go classical, like, I don't know why. I don't know why you would do that. I don't know why anybody would do that. But when it comes to content, what I want is not to protect my kids from things with which they disagree. I want to equip them to disagree. I want them to have a clear eyes and a vision of like, oh, this is good, that is bad. This is dangerous. This is healthy. How would I change it? What would I do? And I want them to be in the driver's seat of authority. So I actually made my older daughter read Harry Potter. She didn't want to. I made her do it. And we had conversations the whole time. As we're talking about what does the author think? What is Harry doing right as a character? What does he understand? But how does he reveal Rowling's immaturity and understanding the nature of goodness? It's like, and we're popping the hood and we're tinkering and pulling stuff apart. I don't want my kids ever to consume any story of any kind like a baby bird, where they have their head back and their mouth open and just whatever. Mm-hmm. Like I want all of it to be like active, engaged, tearing things apart, finding the good, finding the bad. Like it needs to be really, when it comes to narrative, they need to be really, really perceptive and picky. Like yes. Pickiness is great. Like not pickiness, like I don't want to read anything but Spider-Man comics. It's like, but but pickiness in that it takes a lot to impress them. You want your kids to be difficult to impress. They shouldn't just read, Fablehaven and Hunger Games and just whip through stuff and like it all the same. Mm-hmm. They should actually be developing instincts for truth, goodness, and beauty and pulling those things out. But I wouldn't make my third grader read Harry Potter, because she was still a baby bird. It's like she would just, there wouldn't be any resistance. There wouldn't be anything like that. So it's about finding the frame and when is it a healthy engagement? When is it a healthy exercise, for them to really work through. And once you're there, if you really know their frame, you can help them tackle stuff that's harder, darker. I've used a ton of VidAngel and ClearPlay to show them films that they would never see otherwise, because I can pull out stuff that I don't want them exposed to, but they can still be engaging with the ideas of something, or learning to identify how filmmakers affect you and what they're trying to do. Seeing all the strings, I want them to see all the mirrors, all the strings, all the smoke. I want them to be able to identify it and see through the magician's tricks. That's what I want for my kids, so they can really respect great art when they find it, and also so they are never vulnerable to simple manipulation the way I think most of us are.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, it almost sounds like you're an advocate of very intentional, engaged parenting, which is a pretty novel concept. But I think it's something that I'm an advocate of too. In all seriousness, I think it'd be just in hearing it from my perspective, I'm thinking, well, I feel ill-equipped as a consumer. I feel like I'm the bird with his mouth open. And so does the parent first really need to adopt that perspective for themselves and say, boy, I think this happens all the time. And I know there's always a conversation and probably somewhat of a debate of the whole, narrative versus content, or how the two are supposed to work together to make it Christian or not Christian. And it's funny going back to so many of the maybe movies or even books that were, labeled Christian because of, the lack of profanity, or because of, somebody going to church and having a realization of something. But you look at the narrative and you're like, this is not gospel centered at all. This isn't true the way they're portraying it, but they talk about God. And then there'll be other maybe movies or books where it is, people talk about there being a gospel theme through it, there being redemption theme through it, there being Christ-like figures. But you're like, man, how do you as a parent, discern that for your kiddos and for yourself first and foremost?
Yeah, I think that two things. One is you have to start somewhere, and you, in the words of G.K. Chesterton, anything worth doing is worth doing badly. Don't expect to just be great at it. Expect you to take some reps and kind of reassess films that you're already familiar with in terms of what is this saying? What is this doing? And so Hunger Games is a great example. I've talked about it a lot, but it's one of those stories where a lot of Christians were like, this is a Christian story, because a sister sacrifices herself for her little sister. Her little sister's picked to go off and get thrown into these Hunger Games, and her big sister says, take me instead. Like, okay, there's a Christian architecture to that self-sacrifice. The problem is, as soon as she's in the Hunger Games, it's full-on Darwinism. It's just nihilistic Darwinism. So it's like there's this initial, like, the best thing is to sacrifice yourself, and then we move right into the games where the best thing is survival, simply to survive. You can murder kids in their sleep, but it's just about surviving, which is terrible, obviously. But you watch that one little, like, walnut shell move, and Christians, I've seen so many Christians bite and say, this is a Christian story. Or Christians who are on one end of the spectrum. So if we created a curve, and we're like, on one end of the spectrum are Christian families that really love Breaking Bad, and on the other end of the spectrum are Christian families that will only watch Pure Flix. It's like, that's it. And I think that both are wrong. It's like neither of those people are correct. The people who defend Breaking Bad are saying, see, it represents the emptiness of sin and how it goes nowhere. And it's like, and how many seasons did it need to show this life, before I knew? I mean, that was like that's one scene. I should pick that up. I don't need all these seasons of what I call vice tourism, where people are just on vice tourism. They're just wishing they could be bad, and that's why they're watching it. Or you go to Pure Flix, where There's nothing real there. There's no real darkness. There's no real struggle. It's very superficial, and it's saccharine. It's famously saccharine. And so it's just a Christian version of the Hallmark Channel, where it's not Christianity, it's sentimentality. And sentimentality is different. The cross is one of the most unsentimental moments. It's like in storytelling, when Christ went to the cross, that's not sentimental at all. And yet it's deeply, deeply moving. It's this deeply powerful moment of sacrifice. So I think that the key would be to start where you have resources. Start with in the shallow end of the pool, and ask your kids and yourself of anything you see, what is this saying to me? And is it true? How is this making me feel? Or how is this trying to make me feel? And is that biblical? Is it biblical for me to feel this way? And those two things, what is it saying? And is it true? And how is it what's it doing to my loves and my loyalties? To whom is it making me loyal? Is it making me more susceptible to the cool and to the worldly? Is it drawing me there? And is that a biblical way to be feeling? Hot tip, no. But it's that's it. And it's really basic just to start asking those two questions, and ask of the movie Up and Inside Out and all these things. What is it saying? And is it true? Or is this a lie? And how is it trying to make me feel? And so then go to films that other people have gone to and try to follow in their footsteps and pick up stuff. See if you can notice the same thing. So I've actually started I call it LAMP, looking at moving pictures. With my own podcast, we're doing just a monthly film where I throw it out there, and then my co-host and I give everybody a month to have watched it and gone through and sent in questions, and then we discuss it at the end. We're going to break through everything, because there's been so much demand for this. How do I start to see these things? And so you look at films like Children of Men, which is this gritty film, and it's a magnificent pro-life movie. I mean, just magnificent. Just really powerful. When I watch it with my kids, I use filters. There's some nudity in it that I filter out. Anytime, I'm always hunting on ClearPlay and VidAngel. I've got subscriptions both places so that I have a wider catalog to work with. But it's just a great film. It's a really great film. It's powerful. It's pushing in the right direction. It's saying the right things. It's telling the truth. And then also there's places where it doesn't. There's places where it wobbles and where it's broken. And so that resistance of even when I read Tolkien, I want to find things that he could have done better. I just don't want to receive it. It's not scripture. So what could Tolkien have done better? There's plenty of things he could have done better, and it's still magnificent. So turning that on in your head, what is this doing? How's it making me feel? Is that biblical? And what is it saying? And is it true? That's a great place to start. That's the shallow end of the pool. And then past that, you start finding typology and imagery. All that. Don't even worry about that yet. Just start there, and then start wading in with your story engagement.
Awesome. I like that. But honestly, I'm kind of getting exhausted here, because this sounds hard to me. And I've always gone I'm man, reading or, watching something is always associated with this time of leisure, and rest. And part of me is should I feel guilt? I'm going to be, totally honest here. I like reading Louis L'Amour, and I like reading it, and it's fun for me. And I should feel bad about that. I don't know, but I don't know how we should approach just reading entertainment in general in this. Are there times where you can just rest and enjoy something, and how do you know when that time is?
Think of it this way. If you one of the reasons why I pursue this as intensely as I do with my kids is because they want to create. They like creating, and so this is the standard that I pursue is if we're gonna switch over into if we were a winemaking family, if I'd inherited a vineyard somewhere, it's this is that level of I'm trying to train winemakers, which is a different threshold, than just a consumer. But one of the things that's great about stories is that it is a place of rest. It is like a Sabbath rest. It is food. You're eating. So it's you're eating. And so you do need to have some level of maturity in terms of, am I eating something healthy or unhealthy? But it's a meal and you need to eat. We need stories. There's plenty of times when I'm watching something with my kids where I'm saying, this is popcorn. We're going to watch some popcorn. Like, that's it. There's no depth here. It's just, we're going to watch a fun story. Like, we don't need to overthink it. And the same thing's true of books. Like, hey, here's a hamburger. It's like, this is not the pinnacle of Western cuisine, but you're hungry and you need to eat. So here you go. That's most of it. That's most of the time. It's kind of that. But I want their skill set to be up so they can identify for themselves when they're eating popcorn or when they're really engaging with a steak. Children of Men, the film, is like a steak. They need to be able to process it. But one of the problems when people want to just entertain, they just want the leisure engagement, is it's kind of like meeting somebody who tells you they love wine, and you kind of look at them side eyes like you're a little skeptical because that doesn't sound super healthy, and then they make it way worse by saying, when you ask them like what kind, and they say, oh, just any wine, all the wine, just any wine's great. And you should, at that moment, you're thinking, I think you're an alcoholic and this is a problem. Like, this is, you have no threshold. And if they say, I want to be a winemaker, which is what usually happens with some poor teenage boy in the church who just loves stories, any stories, all the stories, give me stories. And then they start saying, I want to write or I want to make movies. And everybody's like, yeah, that makes sense. He loves stories. It's like, no, that's like that person who likes all wine saying they want to own a vineyard. And it's like, it's like, no, we gotta do a little better than that. You gotta have some sophistication, some resistance, before you handle something that's a mocker, something that's really powerful, and you're going to handle it with flippancy. And so I think stories have even more power than alcohol, a lot more power than alcohol, and need to be handled with a lot of maturity and intelligence. And that means we know when we're just reading a Louis L'Amour. Like, we know when that's what we're doing. We're having a hamburger, we're eating some popcorn, and that's great. But we also know when we're swimming into something that we thought was just popcorn, but it's actually trying to undermine everything we know about the world. It's like it presents itself as popcorn, but it's actually got some dark intents,
Yes.
And there's a lot of that too. And that's basically most of what's on Netflix.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I don't even know if it's subtle anymore, which big time actually is ironic. It actually gives me hope for Christian art and for Christian storytelling, because of how the roles are being reversed here, with there being such an overt agenda now that's being, in my opinion, and maybe you can comment to this, there's such an overt, they feel like Christian movies. My wife says this all the time. She goes, wow, like that was the part where they just gave the gospel, that step-by-step gospel message in a Christian movie that totally derailed the narrative. And now that's happening in Hollywood movies. And I'm like, well, that's not going to last, like that, because people see right through that. And if anything, you go back to the last 50 years when they were able to be subtle in their messaging, that's been far more effective. That's been far more, it's gotten their hook in society. And so I'm kind of actually optimistic, because I think, man, Christians have an opportunity here to kind of fill in this void of good storytelling, because big media and big storytellers and the money is going to this, they're really kind of falling to this agenda, and they're forcing it into their stories. I don't know if you see that being a thing or not.
Very much so. I think your read on that is spot on. I think that's exactly what's happening. And there's a huge opportunity for Christians to tell great stories and not their own propaganda. Like, avoid all propaganda formats and tell great, good, true, beautiful stories.
Yes, I like that. Okay, if we can move in to your Netflix show, first, explain yourself. No, I'm joking. In all seriousness, how did that come about, and how would you, because obviously it's a huge company, huge platform, and you at one point, I don't know if this is still the case, you were like the #1 children's show on there. Is that true? Yeah.
Yeah. We had 4 seasons, and 3 of those 4 seasons were, I think you could say, charted, like we're way, and it was It all started because my 3-year-old at the time, she's now 13, but my 3-year-old at the time brought me over one of my novels and asked me where her books were. She gave it to me and it's like, where are my books? And so that night I sat down and started working on a little board book for her called Hello Ninja.
Nice.
This, one for her. And then through a series of wild events, I was like, you know what? I don't want to wait for New York publishing timelines. I'm just going to self-publish this. We did. And then Starbucks picked it as a pick of the week with their iBook. And it kind of like it took off and Target picked it up. And, I ended up selling it to HarperCollins just to deal with all the inventory and everything else. And then I was in LA on a different project, and a producer that I had asked if they could try to put together a show. I said, sure, on Hello Ninja. And I said, as long as I don't have to do anything. That was the rule. But I was in LA and I got a call and said, hey, we're pitching Netflix today if you want to come by. And so I did. And then we actually had a bit of a meltdown in that meeting. There's all these people in there from Netflix, and the writer who's supposed to pitch kind of collapsed and just lost track, like just melted down with nervousness. And so the Netflix execs looked at me and said, so what's the show? So I got to have like an impromptu show pitch.
Wow.
My pitch consisted of basically it's the Sunday panels of Calvin and Hobbes, but without the cynical downbeat right at the end. We're just going to stay in this joyful, exuberant place. And they said, awesome. And they ordered 4 seasons.
Wow.
So, I mean, it was I was like, great, so much for not having to do anything.
Yeah.
And they pulled me in, and I had to do quite a lot, actually. And it was a blast. So the thing about it though, is for me is like, I've always been Daniel in Babylon. I've never not been. So when I started, something I left out of my little story about becoming a writer is when I started out, I thought 2 things. One is I thought I'll have to be a teacher. Like I'm going to be a teacher and I'm going to write. And then I'm also, I'm probably going to have to publish with some small publishers first, probably some Christian publishers, and then work my way up to big publishers like a baseball player going through the minor leagues. I mean, that was kind of how I viewed myself. Instead, I only could get part-time teaching. I couldn't get full-time teaching work. And every Christian publishing house rejected me. So in that 4-year interim where we're talking about like, man, that was a slog. They all said, no, thank you. And the thing that was really interesting is that they also said, hey, we're looking for fantasy. We're looking for these things. We're looking for Christian fantasy, all this other stuff. It's like, that's what I do. So I'm sending them things, and it was like, I've seen this a ton of times now, especially with Christians in film and in publishing. They say what they want and they know it would be best if they did it. This is what they should do. And they still get scared when they get there because they're worried about, they need it to be more pure flixy. They need it to be, really propagandistic instead of just a good story. So I just got no's across the board. And then when finally I showed up in New York, we ended up with 5 major houses, trying to buy my stuff. And I'm a Christian, and it's just, I guess we're just going to the major leagues. I tried to make it in the minor leagues and failed. So my first publishing experience, for my fiction really was, like the biggest house there is, just in Manhattan. And it was great. I loved my editor. I loved the people I was working with. Stuff was good. They knew who I was. It was like they knew what I stood for. At one point, Random House made me write a statement of faith to have on file whenever they had people trying to cancel me. They would send out my statement of faith. This is what he actually thinks. It's like I was never a secret as far as like I'm a Christian. I'm a believer, and I'm the kind of Christian that means it. I'm not a pretend one. So then when it came time to work in Hollywood, it was very much the same. I've never been off the radar. I've never been in hiding. I'm not sneaking in. I'm not putting in my fake nose ring to go in for meetings. It's like I'm me, and it's not hard to Google me and know who I am. And so I've been able to work with some of the biggest names in Hollywood on different projects, and it's never, it's always just been Daniel in Babylon. And when I've tried to work in Nashville, when I've tried to work in Christian film, like when I've had those meetings, it's the same thing happens. When they say what they want, This is what they want. This is what they're pursuing. I say, hey, here's great. I've got one for you. And they're like, but we need that awkward gospel presentation. We need that, we can't just have it be a good story that actually reinforces the importance of family or fatherhood no, we need it really, really like on like a clown nose on top.
Yes.
So I've never fit in the faith market ever. And I've only ever fit in the big secular Babylon of storytelling. And so working over at Netflix didn't feel even new or different to me. Mm-hmm. And I know there's a lot of believers who kind of struggle with the question of whether they should ever support a big corporation. But I think we're kind of all in Babylon. Like we're all here. Like I'm talking to you on an iPhone. It's like I have Amazon Prime because I like free shipping. It's like I'm getting stuff off of Amazon. I'm wearing Nikes because they fit my feet best. I'm talking to you on an iPhone. None of that is an endorsement. None of those things are an endorsement of those companies. And I feel the same way about Netflix. I loved working with those people. It was a blast. Had a great time. Would work with them again. I don't know if they'd work with me again, but it's like that's how I want it to go. I wanted to cut that direction. My dad told me a long time ago, he's like, I'll speak into any microphone. If somebody wants to put a microphone in front of me, I'll speak into any microphone. They're going to pull the plug on me before I hold myself back and refuse to go speak to them.
Nice.
So that's kind of the gist there.
I love it. No, that makes a ton of sense. And that's really encouraging. And like you said, it's really hard. Like once you start, taking what might feel like a kind of a virtuous, self-righteous stance, you're like, well, man, to be consistent in this area, I'm going to, have to be doing a lot of, home sewing, and I'm going to have to be doing a lot of, home gardening here. Your life's going to have to change dramatically. And you know what? If people want to do that, then good on them. That's awesome. Yeah.
I am not called to milk my own chickens.
Yeah. Yeah. No, understandably. Well, Andy, thank you so much for doing this. You've been so generous with your time. And I know it's so encouraging for me to hear, your outlook on everything. And we're really grateful for all the content that you have created, all of your books, which, we'll link all of our listeners to where they can find those. And then, your podcast has been a huge encouragement to me, and my wife, honestly, I think it's my number one favorite parenting podcast, even though that's not, you don't call it a parenting podcast, but my wife and I both, I think, have learned more and implemented more things into our parenting from your podcast over the last year than anything else. So thank you so much for all that you do. And just blessings to you and keep putting out great work.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. All right. Bye-bye.
Cheers.